12 hungry children begged for help. The giant cowboy had only one. Answer heartwarming Wild West tales. The winter came down hard on the high plains. Not all at once, but the way bad news usually does. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Snow lay in thin, stubborn sheets across the Wyoming territory, crusted over by wind that never learned how to rest. Fence posts wore white caps like old men bent under memory. The sky stayed the color of dull iron, and the sun, when it showed, felt more like a rumor than warmth. They called him Harlan Boone, though most folks just said the giant cowboy, not kindly, not cruelly, just as a fact. He stood a head taller than most men, broad as a barn door, shoulders shaped by years of hauling frozen hay and breaking wild stock in colder seasons than this. His beard was thick and dark, already silvered at the edges, and his hands looked carved from fence rail and frost. Harlan lived alone on a spread nobody wanted in winter, a low ranch house crouched against the wind, roof sagging like it was tired of standing. Smoke climbed from the chimney slow and thin, as if even fire didn't want to work too hard. The creek nearby had frozen into a white scar, silent now, its voice buried under ice. Harlan liked the quiet. It didn't ask him questions. That morning he was splitting wood when he heard them. Not voices at first, just sound, wrong sound. Too many breaths where there should have been none. The kind of noise that didn't belong to wind or animal. He stopped mid-swing, axe buried in the log, and listened. There it was again, a cough, thin, then another, then something like a child trying very hard not to cry. Harlan straightened slowly, joints popping like old doors. He scanned the tree line, the frozen pasture, the long stretch of white road that hadn't seen a wagon in days. Then he saw movement. Near the fence, low, huddled. He set the axe down and pulled on his coat, heavy buffalo hide, stiff with age, and walked toward the sound. Each step crunched loud in the snow. He didn't rush. Rushing startled things. People, too. 12 shapes came into focus. Children, all of them thin as winter branches. Coats too big or too small, patched with whatever could be found. Boots worn through at the toes. Faces red and raw from cold, lips cracked, eyes too big for their heads. The oldest couldn't have been more than 13. The youngest, maybe 5. They stood together like a knot tied too tight, fear and hope twisted into the same place. One boy stepped forward. His knees shook so bad Harlan thought he might fall. "Mister," the boy said, voice barely louder than the wind. "Please." That was all. No story, no begging words practiced too many times. Just, please. Harlan looked at them for a long moment, long enough that the children's hope began to flicker. He counted them without meaning to. 12. Too many. Winter didn't forgive large numbers. "Where you come from?" he asked. The boy swallowed. "North. The settlement burned. Didn't make it." A girl beside him held a baby wrapped in a sackcloth blanket. The baby didn't cry. That scared Harlan more than noise would have. He nodded once. No surprise showed on his face. Winter always took its share. "You hungry?" he asked. The boy nodded so hard his hat slipped down over his eyes. That's when Harlan Boone made his decision. Not loud, not brave, just final. "Follow me," he said. They didn't move at first. Adults lied. Promises froze faster than water. The boy looked back at the others, searching their faces. Harlan turned and started walking toward the house anyway. "If you're coming," he said over his shoulder, "do it now. Cold don't wait." The crunch of small boots followed. Inside the ranch house, the cold still clung, but the stove was alive. Harlan fed it wood until the iron glowed red and the air began to change, slow and cautious. He took down the stew pot, beans, salt pork, the last of his dried carrots. Enough for maybe 3 meals. For him. He didn't hesitate. The children sat along the wall at first, backs straight, hands folded, eyes tracking every move like frightened animals watching a trap being dismantled. When the stew began to smell like food instead of survival, one of them started crying. Quietly. Ashamed. Harlan set out bowls, tin ones, mismatched. He ladled carefully, then stopped. 12 bowls. He stared at them. For the first time that morning, his breath caught. He hadn't fed 12 people since the winter his own family died. He pushed the thought away and handed the first bowl to the oldest boy. "Eat slow," he said. "It ain't running off." They ate like they didn't trust the food to stay real, hands shaking, heads down, no talking except the clink of spoons and the sound of swallowing hope. Harlan stood by the stove, arms crossed, watching the fire more than them. He told himself this was temporary, just a night, maybe two. He wasn't built for crowds, he wasn't built for saving. But Winter didn't care what a man was built for. After they ate, he gave them blankets, old army ones, smelling of smoke and time. He laid them out on the floor, every inch filled with small bodies pressed together for warmth. The baby slept. Outside, the wind rose. Later that night, long after the children had drifted into uneasy sleep, Harlan sat alone at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. The house felt different, heavier, like it was holding its breath. 12 hungry children. He could feed them tomorrow, maybe the next day. But winter was just getting started. He stared at the frost crawling across the window and muttered to no one, "Hell of a thing, Boone." The wind answered by rattling the door. And somewhere deep inside that giant cowboy, a question he hadn't asked himself in years began to wake. Not, "Can I help them?" but "How long can I keep them alive?" The second night taught Harlan Boone something he already knew but had hoped to forget. Winter didn't care about good intentions. The wind rose after midnight, not howling at first, just pressing, leaning its weight against the walls like a drunk testing a door. Snow followed, dry and sharp, hissing against the windows. The house creaked in answer, every board remembering storms it had barely survived. Harlan lay awake on his cot near the stove, boots still on, coat folded beside him. He slept light these days. Too many years of listening for trouble taught a man not to sink too deep. From the floor came the sound of breathing. 12 rhythms, uneven, some fast with fear, some shallow from hunger that hadn't yet learned it was safe. Then came the coughing, a small, rattling sound. Wet. Wrong. Harlan was on his feet before he thought about it. The girl holding the baby, the one with the braid tied in twine, was sitting up, panic wide in her eyes. The baby's chest hitched, each breath fighting for room. "He won't stop," she whispered. "He's been like this since yesterday." Harlan knelt, one knee groaning. He placed 2 fingers against the baby's neck. Pulse was there, thin but stubborn. "Name?" he asked. "Samuel," the girl said. Harlan nodded once, as if acknowledging a man, not a child wrapped in rags. He stirred the fire higher, then reached for his medicine box. It wasn't much. A few dried herbs, old remedies his mother had sworn by back when winters were longer and doctors farther. He brewed a tea that smelled like dirt and pine and hope, dripped a few drops into Samuel's mouth, rubbed his chest slow, firm. "Breathe with me, boy," Harlan murmured, voice low, steady. "Ain't nothing taking you tonight." The baby's breaths eased, not much, but enough. That was when Harlan understood. This wasn't about feeding mouths. This was about weathering a season. Morning came gray and bitter. Snow had piled high against the fence, swallowing the lower rails whole. The world looked smaller, tighter, like it was closing in. The children woke hungry again. Hunger didn't respect yesterday's meals. Harlan rationed without letting it show. He ate last, standing, scraping the pot clean with bread so no one would see how little was left. Afterward, he set them to work. Not hard work, just movement. Chores kept blood warm and minds quieter. The older ones hauled wood in pairs. The smaller ones swept snow from the porch, laughing when their brooms did more slipping than clearing. For a few moments, the yard sounded alive again, but the sky stayed heavy. By noon, the storm worsened. Wind tore across the plains like it had something personal to prove. The cattle Harlan kept, only a handful now, huddled close to the barn, heads down, refusing to look at the sky. That afternoon, the boy who'd spoken first, the leader, whether he wanted it or not, came to Harlan while he was mending a harness. "Mr. Boone?" the boy said. Harlan looked up. "Yeah." "There's more kids," the boy said quietly. "From the settlement. They went south. They didn't come with us 'cause there wasn't food." Harlan's hands stilled. "How many?" The boy swallowed. "I don't know. Maybe 6. Maybe more." The wind rattled the barn door. Harlan stared at the frayed leather in his hands. He thought of his pantry, his cattle, the coming weeks. Then he thought of the baby's breath easing under his palm. "All right," he said. The boy blinked. "All right?" "All right," Harlan repeated. "After the storm breaks, we'll look." That night, the fire burned lower than he liked. He banked it careful, listening to the children whisper stories they half remembered. Stories about summers that smelled like bread and fathers who laughed and mothers who didn't worry so much. Harlan didn't join in. He sat apart, sharpening his knife slow and steady, the sound like a heartbeat against the wind. He remembered another winter, another house filled with small sounds. He remembered the silence after. The storm broke 2 days later, leaving behind a sky scrubbed raw and blue. The cold deepened, sharp enough to sting lungs and crack skin. Harlan loaded the wagon with what he could spare: 2 sacks of grain, 1 side of salt pork, blankets. Hope measured out carefully. The older kids insisted on coming. Harlan let them. They traveled south along the frozen creek, following tracks half buried by snow. It took hours. They found the settlement burned down to black ribs and ash. No bodies. That was something. Then they heard crying. 6 more children, huddled in the shell of what had once been a schoolhouse, thin, blue-lipped, alive. Harlan didn't speak much on the ride back. The wagon creaked under its new weight. The children sat close, pressed together like they could make warmth from nothing. 18 now. Back at the ranch, the house felt too small. Walls closed in. Every corner filled. That night, Harlan sat outside on the porch long after dark, breath fogging the air. He stared out at the frozen land and did the math again. It didn't work, not on paper, not in any sensible way. He could stretch supplies, trap more, slaughter cattle early, risk it all. But winter was long, and mercy was expensive. Inside, a child laughed in their sleep. Harlan closed his eyes. He'd once believed a man could outrun his past if he kept moving. Now he understood something else. Sometimes, winter caught you, and the only answer it accepted was how much of yourself you were willing to give. By the 3rd week, the ranch stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a promise that might break. 18 children filled every corner now. Blankets layered thick across the floor. Boots lined along the wall like a row of tired sentries. The air stayed warm from bodies and breath even when the fire burned low, and the smell, soap, smoke, wool, sickness, life, settled into the wood like it planned to stay. Harlan Boone woke each morning before the light and lay still, listening. He listened for coughing that had gone too deep, for breathing that didn't come back up, for the small sounds that meant winter had claimed another without asking permission. So far it hadn't. That didn't mean it wouldn't. Food thinned fast. Harlan trapped what he could: rabbit, fox, once a lean coyote. He showed the older boys how to set snares, how to read the land even when snow tried to erase its own memory. He taught the girls to mend with whatever thread could be found, how to make soup taste like more than water. No one complained. That worried him more than crying ever would have. One morning, while hauling wood, Harlan's knee buckled. Just once. Quick. He caught himself before anyone saw. Pain flared sharp and deep, old and familiar. That knee had gone bad years ago in a stampede, never healed right. Cold made it mean. He leaned on the axe handle, breath steady, and waited for the ache to pass. Because if he went down, everything went with him. The children noticed things anyway. They always did. That night, the oldest girl, the one with the baby, Sarah, set her bowl down untouched and stood. "We can help more," she said, voice steady but eyes fierce. "You don't gotta do it all." Harlan looked up slowly. "You already are," he said. She shook her head. Not enough. She wasn't wrong. The next days changed. The older kids took longer shifts hauling water from the creek where ice had to be broken with stones. They learned to chop kindling small enough to catch easy. They took turns watching the younger ones so sickness didn't spread unnoticed. They became a system. Harlan became something else. Word came with the mail rider. The man stopped longer than usual, stamping his feet, breath fogging. Heard about your place, the rider said. Heard you're housing a whole damn orphanage. Harlan said nothing. The rider shifted, uncomfortable. Territory folks don't like it. Say it ain't safe. Say you're harboring dependents without sanction. Harlan met his eyes. They can come count graves if they want. The rider swallowed. There's talk. Might be inspection. Or relocation. Where? Harlan asked. The rider shrugged. Anywhere but here. After he left, the land felt quieter than before. Not peaceful, expectant. That night, Harlan didn't sleep. He sat at the table counting again. Supplies, days, chances. He wrote a letter. His hand was rough, words simple. Need help. Winter bad. Children here. Any hands or food spare. Harlan Boone. He sealed it and gave it to the rider the next morning. As days dragged, the cold sharpened. Then came the fever. It started with one boy, then two, then four. Harlan worked through nights, cooling foreheads, feeding broth, speaking low and constant like his voice alone might anchor them. His own cough came and went, ignored. On the fourth night, Sarah collapsed while rocking the baby. Harlan caught her before her head hit the floor. That was when fear finally got him. Not loud fear, not panic, the kind that settles deep and whispers this is where it ends. He burned through the last of his strong herbs, sat by the stove with his coat still on, eyes red, jaw set. The children slept fitfully. Outside, the wind returned. Near dawn, a knock came. Harlan was on his feet with the rifle before he thought. Another knock. Firmer. He opened the door. 3 wagons stood in the yard. Men and women climbed down, bundled thick, bags piled high, crates, sacks. At the front stood a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had buried more winters than Harlan had lived. "We got your letter," she said. "Took time. Took arguing." Behind her, people moved, working already. Harlan's throat closed. They didn't stay long enough for thanks. They left food, blankets, medicine. 2 men who knew how to set broken bones. A woman who'd lost children and knew how to keep others alive. When the wagons rolled away, the ranch felt bigger. Hope did that. The fever broke 2 days later. No one died. Harlan sat alone on the porch that night, watching the moon climb over snow that no longer looked like a threat, just land waiting for spring. Sarah sat beside him, the baby asleep against her chest. "You didn't have to," she said quietly. Harlan didn't look at her. Neither did Winter. She smiled, small but real. Inside, laughter drifted out, soft, careful. Harlan leaned back, knee aching, heart heavier and lighter all at once. The giant cowboy had only one answer when Winter asked what he was willing to give. And it hadn't been enough. It had been everything. Winter did not loosen its grip just because help had come. It never did. The supplies bought time, not mercy. Time came in measured spoonfuls and counted nights. Harlan Boone understood that better than most. Winter was a ledger, and it always balanced itself in the end. By late January, the snow hardened into ice crusts sharp enough to cut skin. Trees groaned at night, their trunks cracking like gunshots in the dark. The creek went silent again, frozen deeper than before, and the wind learned new ways to get inside bones. The children grew stronger, but so did their needs. 18 pairs of boots wore grooves into the floor. 18 stomachs woke before dawn. 18 sets of eyes followed Harlan everywhere. Not with worship, not with fear, but with trust. That trust weighed more than any sack of grain. One morning, Harlan failed to rise. It wasn't dramatic. No collapse, no cry. He simply didn't sit up when the light changed. Sarah noticed first. She crossed the room quietly, laid a hand against his shoulder. His skin burned hot beneath her palm. "Mr. Boone," she whispered. His eyes opened, unfocused. "I'm up," he muttered, though he wasn't. The woman from the wagons, Mrs. Calder they called her, took one look and swore under her breath. "He's been burning himself out," she said. "Now winter's taking its turn." They put Harlan in the bed nearest the stove, wrapped him in blankets meant for 3 people, fed him broth he barely tasted. For 2 days, the giant cowboy drifted in and out, mind slipping into old places. He dreamed of cattle moving through snow, of his wife's hands red from cold, still warm when she touched his face, of a house once filled with laughter and then emptied so fast the walls rang. He woke to voices, not his own. Children, reading. Sarah sat beside him, a book open on her lap. The words came slow, careful. Others gathered close, listening like it was firelight. Harlan tried to speak. Couldn't. Mrs. Calder caught his eye from across the room and shook her head. "Rest," her look said. "For once." The fever broke the 3rd night. When Harlan finally sat up, the room looked different. Not quieter. Organized. The children moved with purpose. Wood stacked neatly. Water hauled without being asked. A choreboard nailed to the wall, written in careful block letters. Sarah noticed him watching. "You're late," she said, trying for stern, missing it by a mile. He smiled weakly. "Ain't heard that in a while." Outside, trouble had been listening. The inspector came on a gray afternoon. 2 men with him, coats clean, eyes sharp. Their horses stood stiff in the cold, steam rising from their nostrils. Harlan met them on the porch, cane in hand now, not for show. His knee hadn't forgiven him. "You Harlan Boone?" the lead man asked. "That's me." "We've had reports." "I imagine you have." They stepped inside, counted children, took notes, whispered. One of the younger kids flinched when a man raised his voice to ask a question. Harlan stepped between them without thinking. "Easy," he said quietly. The inspector frowned. "These children need proper placement, institutions, homes with resources." "They got a home," Harlan said. "Right here." The man shook his head. "Temporary arrangements aren't sustainable." Harlan leaned on the cane, pain sharp but grounding. "Neither's winter," he said. "Yet here we are." The inspector hesitated. He hadn't expected that. "You can't do this alone," the man said. "I'm not," Harlan replied. The children stood behind him, Mrs. Calder, the 2 men who'd stayed, a system built out of stubbornness and care. The inspector sighed. "We'll revisit in spring," he said finally, "if conditions improve." When they left, the house exhaled. That night, Harlan sat with the children and told them a story, not a heroic one. He told them about a man who once believed strength meant standing alone, who learned too late that surviving didn't mean much if there was no one left to remember you. The children listened, quiet, understanding more than words aloud. The storm that followed was the worst yet. Snow fell sideways. Wind screamed like it was tearing something loose from the sky. The barn roof groaned under weight it wasn't meant to carry. Harlan went out anyway. Sarah followed, shouting after him. The roof gave way with a sound like thunder breaking. They dug through snow with bare hands, saved what animals they could. Lost 2. Harlan came back limping harder than before, blood freezing in his beard. No one spoke while Sarah stitched his arm. Later, as the storm raged, the youngest child climbed into Harlan's lap without asking. He froze. Then, carefully, he wrapped an arm around her. The house shook. The fire held. When dawn came, the world lay buried. Silence stretched wide and deep. Harlan stood at the window, cane in hand, and felt something settle. Winter had taken from him before. This time it hadn't won. Spring whispered through the high plains long before it was supposed to, gentle at first, shy. The snow receded reluctantly, leaving behind patches of ice and frost that sparkled in the pale sun like scattered diamonds. Harlan Boone, standing on the porch of the ranch, felt the cold loosen its grip at last. The children were awake early, busy as ants. Water drawn from the creek, fire stoked in the stove, boots laced tight. They moved in patterns Harlan hadn't imposed, but patterns that made sense. A rhythm that grew from survival into care, from fear into belonging. Harlan didn't speak much that morning. He watched from the porch, hands crossed over the cane, shoulders steady. The baby. Samuel giggled from inside the house as Sarah lifted him up, spun him around, and caught him again. Laughter bounced off the walls, soft as wind over snow, carrying the first real warmth he'd felt in months. By noon, he gathered the older children in the yard. "We're going to work together," he said. His voice carried, low but firm. "Winter tried to take everything. It failed. But it ain't done. We need to be ready for the next storm. And I need everyone. Every one of you." The oldest boy, now almost 14, nodded. "We will, Mr. Boone. We'll help." Harlan studied the faces around him. They were ragged, frostbitten, eyes still wary, but filled with something new. Trust, maybe even hope. The work started simple, repairing the barn where the storm had torn at the roof, chopping wood to last until the next snowfall, organizing supplies. Harlan taught them the skills he'd learned over decades: which trees could bear weight, how to mend canvas, how to preserve what little food they had. And they listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. When the sun dipped low behind the distant ridges, painting the snow with streaks of orange and gray, Harlan sat down on a fallen log near the fire pit. He rubbed his hands together, warm from the fire's glow, and looked out at the land, vast, harsh, beautiful in its own stubborn way. The children gathered around him, tired but proud. Samuel nestled into Sarah's arms, yawning, eyes wide and trusting. Harlan's gaze swept over them, and for the first time he felt the weight of the winter lift. Not because the storm had ended, but because the people he had fought to save were still alive, still breathing, still here. One of the younger girls, barely 6, stepped forward and placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you," she whispered. Harlan's throat tightened. Words weren't his strong suit. He nodded once, eyes soft but steady. "We did it together," he said. "All of us." He glanced at the horizon, where the sun melted into the mountains. A warm wind carried the scent of thawing snow, of earth turning over, of life beginning again. He could see it in the children's eyes, the promise that came after hardship. And then he understood. It wasn't the supplies that saved them. It wasn't the extra hands, the firewood, or the blankets. It was the choice to keep going, to fight through the cold, to hold on when everything told them to let go. Harlan leaned back, the firelight warming his face, and for the first time in weeks felt the weight of being alone lift. He was a giant cowboy, yes, but a part of something larger now, a family, ragged and hungry but alive, hearts bound together by survival, trust, and care. The children huddled around the fire as darkness settled fully, faces flushed from work, teeth chattering only slightly from residual cold. Harlan passed them bowls of stew, beans, meat, whatever remained. This time he ate last, watching them devour the meal with satisfied hunger and the faintest smiles. The wind moaned outside the walls, but it could not touch them. Inside, warmth and laughter and the soft hum of life filled the room. Winter had tested them, stretched them to the breaking point, but it had also revealed something vital. Courage and kindness, passed quietly from man to child, from hand to hand, from heart to heart. As the fire crackled, Harlan's thoughts drifted briefly to the winters of his own past, the losses, the cold nights, the silence. And now, surrounded by the living, by 12 children who had begged for help and found it, he realized that the harshness of the world had not defeated them. They had adapted, endured, and survived. And in doing so, they had found family where there had been none. He smiled, a rare, quiet smile, and murmured to himself, "Guess winter ain't the only thing that's harsh, but it don't always win." The children laughed softly, and he laughed along, not with ease but with relief. One by one they shuffled to beds, blankets tucked tight, and the house sank into a peaceful rhythm, breathing steady, ready for tomorrow, ready for the next challenge, ready for life. Outside, the moon rose over the plains, silver light spilling across the snow, reflecting back the shadows of a giant cowboy and 12 children who had refused to surrender. And for the first time in months, Harlan Boone felt a warmth that winter could not steal, because it wasn't from fire or food or shelter. It was from the hearts of those who had been saved, and those who had learned how to save each other. In the silence that followed, he whispered, almost to the wind, almost to himself, "We're all right, all of us." And somewhere, deep in the snow and wind, the land seemed to agree.